Good morning and afternoon, everyone. My name is Aaron Gorell, and thank you for participating in today's 280th Justice Clearinghouse webinar entitled Intelligence-Driven Strategies, Creating an Integrated Approach for Justice Agencies. Now, during this webinar, justice practitioners will gain a better understanding of how security is enhanced and crime reduced through intelligence-driven strategies. Attendees will learn some of the modern-day practical applications that harness the power from knowledge produced by the convergence of the latest intelligence methodologies and technologies. Our webinar today has been sponsored by GTL. GTL leads the field of correctional technology, education, and intelligence, as well as government payment services with visionary solutions that integrate seamlessly to deliver security, financial value, and operational efficiencies while aiding inmate rehabilitation. As a trusted industry leader, GTL provides services to over 2 million inmates in more than 2,500 correctional facilities in the United States and Canada, including more than 30 U.S. Departments of Corrections, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the United States Federal Bureau of Prisons. GTL is headquartered in Weston, Virginia, with an employee presence throughout North America. Our presenter for today is Mitch Volkert, who is the Director of Intelligence and Security Solutions for GTL. Mitch is responsible for providing law enforcement and correctional agencies with intelligence-related solutions and services. He is also an active deputy sheriff in Cole County, Missouri, and his 15-plus years of law enforcement experience includes establishing and managing the Criminal Intelligence Unit with the Missouri Department of Corrections, as well as GTL's Fusion Services. Then the last few things I would like to address with everyone is some basic housekeeping items. First, the event is being recorded, and the formal presentation is scheduled to last about 60 minutes. Second, this is a listen-only event, but you can type in any questions that you have for Mitch through the GoToWebinar toolbar, and we'll take as many as possible at the end of the formal presentation. Next, if you experience any audio issues during the webinar, such as the audio cutting in and out intermittently, consider dialing in using the phone number included in your GoToWebinar invite. When the system asks for a PIN, you can bypass that by just hitting the pound key. And finally, after today's webinar, there will be a follow-up survey, and we ask that you complete it. Your feedback helps us shape pretty much everything we do here at the Justice Clearinghouse. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Mitch, it's all yours.
All right, thank you, Aaron. And thank you for that introduction. For everyone on the phone, I appreciate you taking the time. I'm honored that you would take the time out of your day to listen in and learn some of the experiences that I personally have, as well as having talked with many across the country and learned from their experiences. As Aaron indicated, I am the Director of Intelligence and Security Solutions with GTL. Primarily what I focus on are the sub-bulleted list you see on the screen there: intelligence and forensic services, data mining and link analysis, voice biometric, voice to text, contraband detection, and cellular detection and control. So a lot of what you're going to hear, some of you may be familiar with. So we have over 450 registrants for this webinar, so it's a very large presence. There'll be a variety of experiences on this call. It may be new to some of you, may not be new to others, but the goal is that you walk away with something new. So whether you're learning something new or you realize that you've been putting to practice some of these strategies and just didn't have a formal name for it, or that it may just be that there's light at the end of the tunnel for you. So as we're in this data-driven age, there is a way out, and hopefully we can help you with that. So Aaron touched a little bit on who GTL is and our presence, but primarily for this webinar, we are going to focus on just the investigative solutions and primarily focusing on the intelligence-led corrections and intelligence-led policing concepts. So from an agenda perspective, we're going to talk about what intelligence is, what analysis is, the intelligence cycle. We'll go into details on all of these. But once again, hopefully you'll take something away and if nothing else, generate a lot of thought process of how you could help improve your agency's operations. So starting out, what is intelligence? Intelligence can be defined as information that has been analyzed to determine its meaning and relevance. That was kind of how the chiefs of police defined it. As a result, information is nothing more than raw, unanalyzed data. Now, law enforcement and correctional professionals rely on intelligence daily. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of formal intelligence bulletins. It can be simply shift briefings at the beginning of each shift. It may be 2 police officers exchanging information, 2 correctional officers sharing information. So it can be formal, it can be informal. Now, depending on what you read or whose methodology you follow, there can be several different types of intelligence. But for the purposes of this webinar, we're going to focus on these 2, strategic intelligence and tactical. Now, strategic intelligence focuses more on existing patterns and trends. It may be relying on geospatial or temporal mapping of data to establish crime trends, but ultimately it's designed to translate into operational changes, so helping guide how the operations are performed. Tactical intelligence, on the other hand, is a little more specific to a criminal event. So it may be raw or even uncorroborated intelligence. So it's kind of the real time, if you think of maybe like a terrorism threat or an escaped offender, where the information is coming in very quickly and you're needing to get it out into the field, and you may not have a lot of time to validate or corroborate it. But in summary, information plus analysis is what equals intelligence. And we could even take it one step further and talk actionable intelligence, which is ultimately what you want to get to, being that, you can take some sort of action based off the intelligence as opposed to intelligence being stagnant. So from the analysis side, what is analysis? If intelligence is analyzed information, that's about the simplest definition. It is a methodical process. It allows for the deeper meaning of the information. And when I say methodical, I would say that it's kind of a thought-driven process containing many if-then statements. So it is methodical. It's not set in stone. It's not black and white where you can say, I just check the box and do these things and I'm good to go. There will be various paths that come off based off what you're analyzing and the information that's coming in. The formal process that's adopted is described as the intelligence cycle. And we're going to go into that in quite a bit of detail throughout this webinar. And leveraging the intelligence cycle can be a conscious process where you do follow kind of the formal steps. But I think a lot of you, if you're not familiar with the intelligence cycle, as you learn about it, you're going to find that you do that on a daily basis. Once again, you just didn't have a formal name tied to it. So it can be conscious, but it can also be subconscious. And so, that's going to be very similar to various points of life, whether or not you're looking at a baker who tastes different food types and makes decisions based off that analysis, or if your car won't start. So while the analysis process is often performed at a patrol or correctional or even a jail staff level, the formal analysis is oftentimes performed by a criminal or intelligence analyst. So if you're a frontline officer, you leverage a lot of these techniques. You apply these on a daily basis. But there are a lot of agencies that have a formal unit that contains analysts that do the same type of work. The biggest difference with the analysts in an office type environment are going to be that they're equipped more with the specific skills, training, and even the tool set necessary to be more efficient and effective in analysis. So Aaron, we'll come upon poll question number 1.
You bet. Poll question number 1 is open. And folks, the question is, what is the estimated number of investigators that your agency employs today? And certainly, please do respond. The options are 0 investigators, especially if you're not a law enforcement agency, 1 to 2 investigators, 3 to 5, or more than 5 investigators. And we'll give folks just about another 5 seconds to respond here. And thank you all very much for sharing this information. And Mitch, I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll here and share the results. Mitch, 63% of our audience indicated that they have 5 or more investigators, followed by 13% with 0 investigators, 12 with 1 to 2 investigators, 7 with 3 to 5 investigators, and then 4% indicated that they don't know.
Okay.
Now, there is a second polling question here that we wanted to be able to share. And the polling question is, what is the estimated investigator burden? In other words, what is the percentage overlooked? And the options are 150% overworked, 120% overworked, not overworked at all, or the fourth option is I don't know. And we'll give folks about another 10 seconds to respond. All right, let me go ahead and close out the polling results and share the results. Mitch, 42% of the audience indicated that they're 120% overworked, 16% indicated that 150% overworked, 13% said that they're not so overworked, and 29% indicated that they don't know.
Okay, excellent. Yes, and I thank everybody for that feedback, and we'll have a few of these poll questions throughout the webinar, and this kind of helps us gather additional information to understand your environment, the challenges you face, the technologies and services that may be valuable to you, and kind of helps drive the market offering. So I appreciate you taking the time and responding to these questions. So next, we're going to go ahead and dive into the intelligence cycle. The intelligence cycle is very much similar to the scientific process, if you recall that from school. So I like to say that we use that once again in everyday life. Whether I have 3 kids, I have when they come to me and they're fighting, I take in their stories, I gather the information, I process it, I analyze it. Based off that information, I disseminate my findings, take the discipline, and then if you're like me, you end up laying in bed at night wondering if you're a good parent or not. So we apply this process, whether formally or not, every day. The intelligence cycle simply formalizes the process to help an analyst stay on course and methodically work through a case. So it's something good to pin up on the wall behind your desk, or to have as a screensaver, as a constant reminder of the formal process we go through. Because in the heat of the moment, it's very easy to forget a basic step in an intelligence process, just like it can be very easy to skip a step in processing, or a tactical pressure point to use on a passive-aggressive person. So these are all things to help us stay true to our profession, make sure that we don't miss the steps, and that we provide a valuable and thorough product. So now we're going to go ahead and break these steps down, starting with planning. So step 1's planning. I like to say it all begins with advanced preparation. You don't want to wait until you're in the middle of a fire to start preparing for a fire. And so you're going to hear me say that probably several times throughout this webinar, of saying, get prepared, because the crisis that you're not dealing with today will be here tomorrow, and so you want to be as prepared as you can for that. And so when you look at planning, it can be the clearly defined roles and responsibilities. So creating those policies and procedures that your agency is going to operate by, doing joint procedures with other agencies. So it's not just about what your agency is going to do, but think about if you have to bring in other local agencies, state, federal, et cetera, and how are you going to operate? Having a clearly defined plan of what those roles are, who's responsible for what, will avoid those discussions in the heat of the moment. As you evaluate the personnel for those agencies, you want to have those partnerships in place. Recognizing if you need a forensic analyst, does your agency have a forensic analyst? If not, who does? And then going ahead in advance and building those relationships in advance so that you can call upon those individuals as necessary. Having an approved plan adopted and accepted in advance will make life much easier for you, especially if you're in the middle of a tactical intelligence operation. So more of that real-time, on the spot. This isn't a long-term strategic plan. This is something that we've got to move on now, and so having that in place is important. And finally, focusing on the data systems available to your analysis, because many of these systems are disparate. So if you look at maybe your JMS, your RMS, your inmate telephone system, if you're operating out of a jail, visitation, accounting, your CAD system, if you operate CAD, a lot of those systems may or may not talk to one another. So getting those things in place, getting any MOUs in place or agreements with agencies that allow you to touch that data as necessary is very important. And when you start evaluating data sources, don't become tunnel visioned and only looking at what's within your agency. So think outside your agency, look at other agencies. Also think about your social media outlets, so your open source data points. So whether or not you want to be looking at Facebook, Twitter, things like that. Some of those softwares have APIs available where you can tie in and research that data. So you just want to research that and see what's available to you. But keep an open mind when you start looking at those data points and building that library. The second step is collection. The gathering of that information, having it available to you is critical. Once again, just as you want to get the planning done, you can start data collection today. Now, very similar to the legal question you ask when you go to a scene of asking that first question of can I legally be here, the same applies to collection of data. Making sure that you can legally collect that data. Can you legally collect it? Can you legally possess it? So always keep in mind that as you work through the intelligence realm, you want to make sure that everything that you're doing is lawful. Looking at the amount of data you collect. So collection of data is not necessarily driven by the volume. And that's a lot of times we'll get sidetracked and want to immediately go out and collect as much data as we can and not take into account the fact that we can potentially overwhelm ourselves. So as you go to collect data, remember success isn't measured by the amount of data you collect, rather it's measured by the output. So making sure that the data you collect is potentially reliable, both in the reliability in the source as much as the reliability of the data itself. So kind of keep those things in mind. And that's when we start talking about the collection of the data. For the purpose of this webinar, we're going to assume that it is legal for us to collect it. So we're going to bypass that. And as we start diving into the intelligence-led policing or intelligence-led corrections concepts, which we'll get into more detail, keep in mind that it is a shift from post-event data collection, so after the fact data collection, to collecting the data in advance. So you should be constantly gathering the relevant data during your daily routine, as opposed to waiting once again until you're in the middle of a crisis and then trying to go collect that data. So it is a balance between the proactive collection and making sure you don't bury yourself. So keep that in mind. And I'd be remiss if I didn't speak about 28 CFR Part 23. So if you're operating a multi-jurisdictional, federally funded intelligence sharing application, there are some additional restrictions that can apply in that realm that relates to purging of data or needing to revalidate if you're going to retain. So you'll want to do some additional research on that. Okay. The next step is the processing of the data. So once you've gathered it, you want to process it. Manual data processing can be very time consuming and inefficient. So similar to advanced data collection, data processing can be performed in advance. And so as you look at the data, and we talked about the reliability and considering the source, you need to look at that and see if it needs cleansed at all. So from a cleansing perspective, I think in our realm, a lot of what we end up having to work with are differing agency numbers. So you'll have an FBI number, maybe a state ID number, an agency number, and a booking number. And oftentimes agencies don't use the same number for tracking in various data systems. So being able to have, I'll call it that primary table that allows for the cross-referencing of all those numbers is critical. And then it can be as simple as things like the phone numbers that I've got listed there, where the formatting is just different. But if you're trying to correlate those three different numbers in three different systems, it needs to be cleaned up or cleansed in such a way as so that the matching can occur. And once again, all that can be performed in advance. It doesn't have to wait until the incident or some sort of tactical incident is underway. So try to get ahead of the curve with that, standardizing the data that you're going to put into your warehouse. It's not saying, or I'm not saying that everyone has to use the same number, but you just need a way to correlate the various data points to distinguish that John Smith in two different systems is in fact the same John Smith, or whatever the name is. Okay. And Aaron, let's go ahead and do poll question number 2.
You bet. The poll question that we have up right now is what is the estimated number of analysts your agency employs today? Is the number 0, 1 to 2, 3 to 5, or more than 5? And of course, we do have that option of I don't know, just as with the other questions. Mitch, one of the things as we think about correlating the data that occurs to me, and we probably don't have time to talk about this now, but I'd be really curious, how do you identify those different data points and how one personal identifier might match to another? And so maybe that's something we could talk about during the Q&A session.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
So I'll make a note of that.
Perfect. And I'm going to go ahead and close the polling and share those results. 35% of our audience indicate that they have 5 or more analysts on staff. 26% indicate 1 to 2. 22% indicate that they do not have any analysts on staff. And 11% have 3 to 5 analysts. And I think we've got another question right after this one. Let me go ahead and open that up. All right. The next question is what is the estimated volume of cases that require data analysis each month? And again, it's 0 to 3, 4 to 10, 11 to 20, or more than 20 cases. And I'll give folks about another 5 seconds to respond. Thank you so much for indicating your results, everyone. And what we've got is 39% of our audience indicated they have 20 or more cases. 16% indicated 11 through 20. 14% indicated 0 to 3. And 4% indicated 4 to 10 cases. And I'll go ahead and close down the poll results and turn it back to you, Mitch.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, and so as you see by our questioning, we really separate analysts from investigators, recognizing that there is a difference in skill set, training, ability, access to the tools, and it's just a different discipline and a different focus. And so I appreciate that feedback, and once again, that helps us kind of evaluate the challenges you all are up against. All right, so the next step is analysis, and it involves essentially making sense of all the information that was collected and processed. Now, when it comes to analyzing large amounts of data, I tend to find analysts will take one of 2 approaches. Some like to start with a single data source and layer additional data on one at a time. So starting small and growing things out. Others prefer to start with the entire quote unquote onion and peel it back at a layer at a time. And there's not necessarily one method that's better than another. One's not right and one's wrong. It really is based on personal preference and how your mind processes information. Now, when you look at analyzing data, you want to make sure there's a clear separation between your fact-based components versus what you're inferring. So oftentimes we'll find where analysts may jump to a conclusion that they really can't jump to. And so it may appear that way. It may be driving you that way. You may want to be inferring that, but you really can't say it. And so it's important to recognize that your inferences can be broken down into 4 types. And those listed here are hypothesis, prediction, estimation, and conclusion. Once again, a lot of this is kind of formal textbook type stuff, but recognizing that there is a formal process to what we do. Analysis is a profession. It is something that you want to be able to articulate very clearly why you do what you do and what the elements are that are included in your report. Okay. After analysis is dissemination. Now, when it comes to dissemination, we'll talk a little bit about the report first. But the intelligence report itself should provide intelligence pertinent to identifying either persons of interest, maybe suspects in a crime that has occurred, or potentially just attempting to prevent crimes before they occur. But ultimately, all those things are looking to influence some of the operation going forward. When you get on the intelligence-led policing, intelligence-led corrections concepts, you're really wanting to, through your intelligence products, influence the operational methodologies that make the street work more efficient. So while intelligence reports aren't necessarily held to the same probable cause requirements of investigative reports, you still want to exhibit some level of responsibility in not making those far-reaching correlations that I mentioned a few seconds ago. You don't want to put yourself at risk, your agency at risk, nor do you want to risk the liability of your own credibility. So don't give up your credibility as an analyst, because as we all know in this profession, whether it's as an analyst, as a law enforcement officer, as a correctional professional, your credibility means everything. So don't put that at risk. You want your reports to be thorough, keeping in mind that often what you don't find is as important as what you do find. So a lot of times as we work with analysts, we tell them that, if you check something and it runs into a dead end, at least call out the fact that you took that step and recognize the lack of connection, the lack of association, the lack of data. Now, for the most part, cooperative and proactive intelligence sharing operated under the old mindset of a right to know, need to know. And what we, post 9/11, we try to do a little more of a right to know, need to share. The idea of a right to know is having the legal authority to possess the information or the intelligence product. The need to share concept shifts the responsibility from the recipient of the product, the old need to know, to the responsibility being over or being on the intelligence product producer. So if it's your report, proactively sharing that as broadly as you can. And we'll talk about that shortly as well. So dissemination itself can be in written or verbal form. Obviously, at least from our perspective, written is the preferred methodology. It then allows for less misunderstandings and a little more clarity and formality in the product. And then the final step in the intelligence cycle is the reevaluation. Looking to see, was it a good plan? Did we collect all the data that we should have? Were we prepared in advance? Did we have the sufficient resources, et cetera? The thing about the intelligence cycle is various steps of the operation may be at various steps of the intelligence cycle at any given time, and they may be overlapping. So you'll have various things going at the same time, but all of them essentially on a similar track to follow the process. And Aaron, let's go ahead and do poll question number 3.
You bet. Bringing up poll question 3, and you'll note that this really is intended only for those folks in the audience coming from a jail or prison. And the question is if representing a jail or prison, what is the bed count for your agency? And the options are 1 to 100, 101 to 200, 201 to 500, or more than 500 beds. And again, if you're not or affiliated with a jail or prison, either feel free to not respond at all, or you can check that last bullet point. I don't know, not jail or prison. And we'll give folks about 5 more seconds to respond. And sharing the results. 51% indicated that they're not affiliated with a jail or prison. Wow, 38% indicated that they have 500 or more beds in their facility. And then basically the other buckets, 201 to 500 is 4%, 101 to 200 is 3%, and 1 to 100 is also 3%. And we will hide those poll results and go to the next one. And this one is if you're representing a law enforcement agency without or some other entity without inmates, what is your sworn officer count? 1 to 10, 11 to 24, 25 to 74, or more than 75. And again, if you don't have any sworn officers in your agency, feel free to either not participate or select that last option. And we'll give folks about another 5 seconds. And sharing the results now. 50% of our audience indicated that they have 75 or more sworn officers, followed by 9% with 25 to 74. And then split evenly with 5% is 11 to 24 and 1 to 10. And then 30% did indicate that they do not have sworn officers. And Mitch, back to you.
All right, thank you, Aaron. So from the intelligence-based practices really rose in the U.S. after 9/11. So 9/11 essentially caused the focus to come on the intelligence community and recognize and identify problems with information sharing that were noted for a variety of reasons. And we're going to touch on a few of those here in a moment when we talk about barriers. So the intelligence-led policing or intelligence-led corrections concepts can be defined as essentially the management philosophy supporting optimal resource allocation based on fully understanding the operating environment. And that was a quote from the New Jersey State Police is how they defined it. But it was a shift from operations directing intelligence to intelligence directing operations. And the drive and the hunger for the intelligence led to the increase of infusion centers, the task force participation, and it wasn't just from the government side, but also from the private partners. Now, the radicalization of inmates in prisons also put a focus on corrections and the wealth of information that the correctional facilities had access to. And as such, correctional agencies also saw an increase in participation in various task forces and fusion centers. So from the practical application side of intelligence-led policing and intelligence-led corrections, as we talked about earlier with the intelligence cycle, that's a large component of it. It's leveraging the intelligence on the back end to drive the operations going forward. Now, from my perspective, the practical application of it, of the ILC, ILP concepts, it's not an all or none. In fact, I would say 99% of the time, it's probably going to be some sort of hybrid approach. And the reason I said that, as we talked about, or as we did those poll questions, 75% of the nation's agencies have less than 24 sworn officers. However, it's recommended that you have one analyst for every 70 sworn personnel. So those smaller agencies may or may not possess the resources to support a full-time analyst. That's not to say that they don't have access to important data, because they do. That's not to say that they don't have or don't perform a lot of the important tasks associated with intelligence gathering and analysis, because they do. It just means that they're going to be short on resources, and that they're not able to take, say, manpower from traditional patrol roles or maybe a jail staff member, and dedicate them to doing intelligence work only. So most agencies operating at these levels do some sort of hybrid operation. When you look at the implementation of these techniques and strategies, you may look at things such as agency restructuring, strategic planning based on the intelligence-driven analysis, participation in those task forces, and like we talked about before, the adoption of the intelligence cycle. A critical element, in addition to things like training and making sure everyone understands what these are is ensuring that you have full buy-in within the agency from top down, bottom up, all directions. Because it's not just a philosophy that can be at the top of the food chain. If you're boots on the ground, who are your primary, oftentimes your primary data collectors, if they're not buying into the intelligence-driven strategies. So you want to make sure that the message is well adopted within the agency and that all personnel are on board. Now, from the private sector side, because some of you may have wondered, what does GTL have to do with intelligence-driven strategies? We were heavily involved in providing technologies that helped generate data to collecting the raw data, and we recognized that agencies had a need for tools and services to help complement those efforts. So the problem isn't just for investigators; it's really for everyone. And so the primary tools that we see from the private sector side focus on social network analysis, some geospatial, some temporal analysis, but in some cases even predictive analytics. From the law enforcement side, looking at all the various data points that get pulled in and needing to find a way to leverage that to make sense of all that raw data. So the needs, once again, it wasn't just tools. We also found the personnel. So as we generated the raw data, funneled it all in, agencies needed tools to manage the data. We provided the tools, but then they realized that, look, I may have, once again, referring back to those 75% of the agencies with less than 24 personnel, they didn't have the staff to leverage the tools. So then we needed to look at augmenting the agency staff. As a result, and to meet those needs, then we deployed various services, and it's not just we're just one of many vendors in the space, but ultimately providing private sector services to augment the staff and provide intelligence value. That intelligence value can be generally in the form of subscription services, but it provides on-demand support. So it can be, if you have a major incident and you engage from that perspective, or in a lot of sites, we do dedicated analysts where they're embedded with the agency's personnel and support those investigators or even support other analytical staff. But the common tasks they perform are communication monitoring, disparate system integration and analysis, so evaluating the social networks, reactive data analytics, predictive analytics, engage in the digital forensic services, and then also do the consultation and training. So ensuring that we get, once again, trying to build a strong intelligence community and build that force multiplier that allows for agencies to benefit from other agencies based on their intelligence practices. Next, we'll do, Aaron, jump to poll question number 4.
You bet. And this is the last polling question. And the question is, does your agency support private partnerships to support the intelligence needs of your agency? And the responses are yes and no, pretty straightforward. So we'll give folks just about another 5 seconds. Folks, if you do have any questions for Mitch, please do enter them into the GoToWebinar toolbar. We've received a number of questions already, and so we do have a limited amount of time to first come, first serve, so to speak, with the questions. I'll go ahead and close it and share the results, Mitch. and let you know that 57% of the attendees here indicated they do support private partnerships and 43% indicated they do not. And back to you.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Aaron. All right, so next we're going to talk about some of the barriers that can come with the intelligence-led philosophies. Starting out with why we don't share. Sometimes it's something as simple as just having disparate data sources. The challenges, it might be the hierarchy within the agency. There may be legal restrictions. So there can be a variety of reasons that come into play. One school of thought is that giving away knowledge is a form of giving away power. And having, I was working the street during 9/11 and experiencing afterwards the post 9/11 intelligence sharing mentality. It put a focus on a lot of the give to get unwritten rule that was in place. Because everybody wants the pat on the back. A lot of times the law enforcement realm is a thankless profession, and so a lot of people held tightly onto their information, looking to solve that big case. And that's where we talked a little bit before about the need to know, need to share philosophy, and trying to shift that into to proactively doing that. So I can't speak for each individual agency represented on this call. There are always going to be challenges and hurdles to get over, but that's not to say they can't be overcome. And, if it's part of, having a presentation like this and the partnership in this environment is that you all build the networks and you can ask questions and get guidance and advice on how to overcome things. So please reach out even after this webinar if you have challenges getting over those barriers, and let's see if we can help you out. So next, let's talk about the qualitative analysis or assessment. From an assessment perspective, I'm very big on the qualitative value of the intelligence versus quantitative. As you look at that, and I guess what I'm saying is, once again, it's not about how much you generate, it's about the quality of what you generate. And while many in the realm will focus on how much data they culminate through, we really want to focus on the actionable intelligence that we're outputting. So making sure that you have taking a strategic approach, that you have those established procedures that help guide what you do, and ultimately, making sure that everyone's held accountable to developing a quality product. Because once again, it's not about the amount of raw data collected; it's in the output that you have. Okay. So as we start to bring this to a close, in summary, one, don't wait until you're in the middle of a crisis to start integrating intelligence-led concepts. It's a good practice to start integrating it today so that you're better prepared for the future. It is a conscious methodology that you want to be able to formalize your processes, your strategies, get your standard operating procedures in place. Make sure that it's a top-down buy-in so that your frontline staff are in sync with your executives and administrators. Investigators and analysts, they are not necessarily synonymous. While there is some overlap, recognize that analysts may have a different trait, a different skill set. They may have different training, access to different tools that may lessen the load on your investigators and help them find that needle in the haystack quicker. Also, the data tsunami is manageable. So all this data that's being generated in today's day and age, don't feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, because there are tools, there are resources available to help you to manage it all. And once again, intelligence-driven strategies can start with you. So it doesn't matter what your role is within an organization. You can start adopting policies. You can start influencing decisions at whatever level you're in. Okay, and with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Aaron.
Mitch, thank you so much, and thank you to GTL for a willingness to help share the presentation and the content today. Folks, GTL is considering additional closed-door webinars in 2019 that would focus on specific intelligence-related techniques, and they would be limited to justice personnel. If this is of interest, could I ask you a big favor and let them know through the post-webinar survey? I think it's either the last question or second to last question. Just asks yes or no. Is that something that you would be interested in? I also wanted to let you know, as we wait for additional questions to be submitted, that our next webinar that relates to strategic planning and evidence-based policing is on November 27th. And if that's something that is of interest to you and you haven't registered yet, you can just go to the Justice Clearinghouse website, go up to events, and find that event, which is on November 27th. And Mitch, we've got our first question is, let's see, how important is it to have an analysis policy in place? And what is the best approach to working with command staff of a correctional facility to get a policy in place for investigators?
All right, thank you, Aaron, and thank you for the person that posed the question. So having a policy in place, it's like anything else. It provides a guideline for your staff to recognize what your philosophies are, what your strategies are, what direction you want to go in. It helps protect the agency. It helps protect the employees. Having an intelligence policy is no different than any other policy. They're there to guide operations and protect the agency and the staff. So I believe it's important. You know, the analysis or the policy itself doesn't have to box people in too tightly. So you know, you don't want to necessarily lock them down to only being able to do certain things if you know, unless that's necessary. But ultimately, it's to communicate your vision. Think of it as a way of communicating the mission statement, a commitment to intelligence-driven procedure or intelligence-driven practices. So I believe it's very important, and most agencies that have adopted this process do so through the policy and procedure.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Our next question is from Micah. Micah says, I have a team of analysts and an attached detective. What's the best way to integrate the sworn perspective into that analytical process?
I guess their perspective. I mean, I think well, I'll back up and say in my experience, at one point in my career, I managed both analysts and investigators. And investigators, I often found, wanted to say, you know, I'll go get my confession, I'll go pound the fist on the table, use my interview and interrogation skill sets and get what I need, without any pre-analysis to going into asking those questions. And so my process was, in my vision, you don't know what questions to ask without some sort of analytic analysis being performed prior to going into that interview or interrogation. So I think if you can identify, it's obviously a selling point where you're going to win people over. So whether or not the detective would be on board, not on board with the intelligence-driven process or the value the analysts bring to the table, showing those connections to where they say, look, I didn't know that person A was connected to person B, and that's very critical in the questions I would ask during the interview. So I believe it's a give and take as far as the parties at the table seeing the value that each one brings, and a lot of that is done through experience. And we do that quite regularly, even with the tools that we provide, is showing the value the tools bring, which then spark more interest to have access to the tools. So I think the best thing there is time.
Great. The next question is an interesting one. Brad says, how do you overcome the challenges of a statistic-driven department As an intelligence detective, I find it difficult to provide command staff with the statistics they desire to justify the amount of time necessary to research and gather and analyze intelligence.
All right, and that was from Brad?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Yep, thanks, Brad, for that question. Yeah, I think for me, it's trust. We have that discussion as well as a private company. A lot of people want, I want to be able to hold you to a measuring stick, a numbers game. Whether it be monitor X number of phone calls in a given period of time. And from my perspective, if I monitored 1,000 calls and generated one actionable intelligence item, or I measure or listened to or monitored 500 calls and generated 5 actionable intelligence items, which one would you want? Obviously, you want the more actionable intelligence. Now, how you communicate that within your agency, it's a balance between quantitative and qualitative, and you just have to work with those individuals, build the trust, find out what it is they really are interested in. So, for example, in the example I gave, when I talk with our own partners, they come to the realization, well, I guess how much you just simply churn. I'm really more interested in the output, which is very difficult to quantitate or quantify because you don't know what you don't know until you produce it. So in those discussions, when I have those types of discussions, they generally come down to trust and saying, do you believe, we talked a little bit a few slides back about accountability. Do you believe that we have the right practices and strategies in place? Do you believe we have the right personnel that are trained and have the skills and the tools available to them? And do you trust me to hold them accountable to produce actionable intelligence?
Great response, Mitch. Now, earlier I had talked a little bit about how do you select those fields? How do you start matching identities across systems? Did you want to take a few minutes to kind of talk about the approach that you use to identify those appropriate fields?
Sure. And generally, a lot of times that's part of the implementation process. So as you start looking at technologies that can help integrate those disparate data systems, our first step is to kind of sit down and interview the end users and identify what are the data systems you touched today during your investigations or your analysis. So we'll identify, generally it'll be anywhere from 10 to 15 different systems, most of which are disparate that don't integrate. Then from that point, it's really about diving into the back end of the data and looking and saying, let's say an offender, for example, maybe the jail may use a booking number, but the RMS system is using a permanent ID, but the crime lab or maybe the fusion center is using the state ID number versus another group that's going to use an FBI. So it's really about diving in, finding the raw data, and then looking to see what correlations need to be made and how you can make those correlations. It's some legwork, I'll put it that way.
Absolutely. And then our last question for today is, in your experience, what systems typically provide the most useful information for crime analysis?
I think you're going to find a different. So we've got correctional personnel on the phone. Their data systems may be different than law enforcement, traditional law enforcement or policing agencies on the phone. What I always start out with is think about reliability, the reliability of the data, and when people are most honest. So if you think about when people are likely most honest when they want something or when they need something, and who they call for help. So one of the most overlooked data points that I tend to find are like CAD systems. Because when people call help, they call 911, and when you say, what's your name, what's your phone number, they're generally going to be pretty honest there. Now, you have to check with your local laws on whether or not the CAD data can be accessed. But so once again, always remember that start with the legality of everything you do. But so you just have to kind of look and see what you touch on a regular basis. Look at reliability from the correctional perspective. Very familiar there. A lot of times it's your inmate calling data, visitation data, deposit data, et cetera. But it can vary from place to place, and that's an important element of any tool that you look at, is that it have the flexibility to ingest what's important to you, not what's important to Mitch or some vendor that's providing the tool. It needs to be flexible to meet your needs.
A fantastic response, Mitch. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for a great presentation today. Folks, do complete that survey and let us know if you'd like additional webinars that would focus on more specific techniques. And with that, I want to wish everyone a wonderful holiday week next week, especially for those of you that are taking time off. And with that, this concludes today's Justice Clearinghouse webinar. Thank you, everyone. Take care now. Bye.
All right. Thank you all. Bye-bye.